Hello, friends. It's time for Thought Shifting Thursday. As you can see, my beloved's not here with me today. We usually do these together. She is on a missionary adventure, you might say, taking our friend Jenny's dog to Mexico to get some surgery because it was way too expensive here. So, anyway, talking today about social conditioning of men and women and social roles, and reading a book by Glennon Doyle called Untamed. Really great book. She's a phenomenal writer. Listening to it rather by audio. And hi, Naomi. You'll be interested in this, Naomi. So, really interesting book by Glennon Doyle called Untamed, and it really goes into all of the social programming that we've inherited and that just continues to go from generation to generation. I think it's getting better each generation, more open, more wisdom, and yet so much of it still exists. And she uses this interesting story in the very beginning of the book about they went to this zoo, and the big deal was they had a cheetah run, and the cheetah ends up running. They let it loose, and it runs after this fake rabbit. And then it. Have you read the book, Naomi? Or heard of it? And ends up getting a big steak to eat, right? So anyway, the animal is completely domesticated, but at some point, her daughter says, look at the cheetah," and it was over by the fence, and it like somehow had regained its power, right? Recognizing that, and she said, you're a damned cheetah, for God's sake. You could rip these people who have domesticated you into pieces in just a moment. So, and that becomes a metaphor for her life and all the programming that she experienced, and there's some just really, really, and she's a woman who was married with kids and ended up falling in love with another woman, and her marriage had been dead for many years, and just all that she had to go through, and she was already a very accomplished author at the time. But in the chapter I was just reading, maybe next week we'll talk, because we'll continue this discussion and bring Karina into it, and she can talk about how she has felt that she's been socially conditioned as a female. So the chapter I was just reading or listening to was all about her son, and how socially conditioned he was, and all the mistakes she had made up until realizing this, and really she was focused more on her daughters, and trying to raise them in a way that they weren't as socially conditioned. And then she noticed, oh my God, my son is like that as well. And so talking about the male conditioning, she just points out, which a lot of us know, that the way that the gender roles that we have been passed down through history are that men are strong, and men are meant to conquer women. I mean, that's kind of the message that young boys get, and especially she talks about the porn industry, and how it's I mean, as a child, the most exciting thing we could do is like steal a Playboy from the store and look at it, right? And nowadays, kids at a very young age are are exposed to porn, and in ways that it is so much misogyny goes on, right? And there's just so many ways that society stereotypes these gender roles. And she made a point in a very kind of profound way that we call some qualities masculine, some qualities feminine, and I think there's generalities that you can make. You can say men, on average might be more mental than women. Women might be more emotional, and yet more sensitive, more compassionate. There are many people who feel that if women were in charge, we wouldn't have as many wars, right? And so, there's some truth in that, but they're generalities, and because there's everything in between, right? And so, is there any value in placing those labels? This is male, this is female. Um, so, what else do I want to say about this? I'll give my personal experience. I mean, my father died when I was 7, so I feel like I wasn't quite as indoctrinated as I might have been, and yet, even though I didn't have a father to instill as I was growing up and, into maturity and to have that kind of influence, society still does. And so, men aren't supposed to cry, right? And so that's a big thing. And I've healed so much of that. I mean, when we do our retreats, one of, the Primal Fire retreat, which I think, Naomi, you've been on four now, 3 or 4 on Catalina Island. I've done them all over. In our class, our existential class, kink class, we're talking about it, and Eric, who's in the class, has been to six retreats on Catalina and 3 that we did in Canada. So that's the all-time record. But on the retreat, one thing I've noticed when people are given permission to just be who they are, that's the main emphasis, is just be who you are. If you're feeling sad, cry. If you're feeling joyful, laugh out loud. If you're angry, scream at the ocean. And so one thing I've noticed in myself and others is that, usually when people start crying, they might hide their face or dry their tears or say, I'm sorry. I hear that so often when people start to cry, my clients or whoever. Sorry about that. And on the retreat, what I noticed is people will cry and they won't even wipe away their tears because it's so beautiful to be understood and to be willing for those feelings to come out. And Naomi says, I grew up conditioned to please men, to thrive, as was my mom from Japan. To please men in order to thrive, as was my mom from Japan. 4 primal fires, that's right. Yes, it's my dream place, an example of what I'd like the world to be like. Sometimes it's a culture shock when we come back from being, 5 days. Originally we did 3 days, and then it was 4. The group keeps asking for more, and so now it's 5 days, 4 nights. And when we're in this supportive environment, in rustic camping, connected with nature, skinny dipping in the ocean, some people do, and just feeling free and open. And then you come back to society. Sometimes it's difficult for people to reintegrate where there isn't that open-hearted support system. So, but I still notice it. I noticed it the other day because I'm thinking about this, right? So I go to get a cup to put my tea in, and I'm looking at the cups, and I'm avoiding taking a feminine looking cup, right? Because it just doesn't feel right for me, right? And I know that's social conditioning. It's not a big thing, obviously, but it's important. I'll tell you a story that this did kind of come from my father's influence, and I guess this is getting very personal today. Is I never felt accepted by my father when I was a young child, and I never got to work that out with him. And I don't know how much of that was real, how much of it was my perception, but I have 2 primal scenes that I go back to. One was when he was trying to teach me to play baseball, and I wasn't able to hit the ball, and the more and he was getting frustrated, and the more frustrated he got, the harder I tried to hit it, and the further away from the ball did my bat swing. And so that was, and then he finally just gave up. And that was not too long before he passed away. So I never got to learn from my dad how to play baseball. I remember sometimes I'll see kids playing baseball with their dads at the park, and they're so loving and having so much fun, and it's like it'll. But I love my dad, and it's not it's not to blame anyone, right? I mean, he raised me in the best way he could, and it was based on how he was raised. But and every generation, those going backwards, those gender roles were more solid. So another thing I remember is one time I was with my mother, and my dad came home, and I think she was painting her toenails, and so I said, I want to do that. I was painting my toenails, and he came in and he was all angry, right? Because he didn't want his son to be painting his toenails. And it's interesting that came back to me. I was doing a session with these very interesting psychic healers. I don't remember their names. When I was visiting a client in Las Vegas, and she treated me to this session. It was very powerful, and I guess somehow that embracing the feminine came up, and I flashed back to that moment, and they gave me the homework of going home and painting my nails in a feminine way and just really enjoying it. And I never did that, but then I realized that I noticed one day as I was putting this medication on my toes to eliminate some toenail fungus, that I'd been painting my toes for like a year with this stuff, and I decided to do it and honor my feminine side in doing it. So I guess just to bring this down to resolution and to action, I guess it's just to really question what, and because I'm reading this book, I'm questioning it myself, is how much of our identity is tied to gender roles or to any kind of role or personality attributes that society puts on us, right? And it's interesting that I keep coming back to the Primal Fire retreat, because it is the antithesis of social conditioning, because we call it the Primal Fire because it's there's no ideology being presented. In fact, it's about getting out of our heads, into our bodies, connecting with Mother Earth, and discovering who we are at a primal level. We take off our watches because we don't need those. We turn off our phones. We drop our roles, all of our roles, society roles, my role as a husband, my role as a father, and just rediscover with nature and with the supportive tribe, who am I really, right? And so I hadn't thought about this in specifically in terms of gender roles, but that comes up again. How many men? Oh gosh, that reminds me. One of the most beautiful things, I'm going to get teary with this, is almost every year, and we usually have more women than men at this retreat, probably 60-40, 70-30 sometimes, and just about every single time, as men are like openly sharing their emotions, we'll hear some of the women say, it is such a privilege, it is such a wonderful opportunity to be in a group where men can share their sensitivity, right? And of course, it's great for us men to be in a group of powerful women. I mean, just anyone who's going to go on this retreat, it takes a lot to get there, right? Because I wasn't planning on talking the retreat this much, but I'm passionate about it. And we have spots open if anyone's interested. And Beauty says, ultimate feeling of freedom and support. Yes, positive masculinity and femininity. It was so cool last year because Becca's son, Max, it's interesting. He came with us a couple of years ago, and he was he was a young boy, and the next year he sprouted up like at least a foot, and he was becoming a young man, right, going through puberty, and so we did an exercise that I designed knowing that he was going to be there, and it was a rite of passage. And it was very, very cool. And each man, regardless of their age, just decide what they wanted from the group of men in our group circle. And by the way, while we were doing this, the women were doing, led by Becca, a sacred bathing exercise on the other side of the beach. And so each man just asked, what is the rite of passage that we want to go through, and each one had a different thing. We had men from, Max is 14, I think, 13 or 14, to someone who was in their mid 70s. We have Janice, who comes in the retreat, by the way, who's 85, will be 86 this year. So we have what a range of what a mix of race, of age groups, of men and women, of transgenders. I mean, we just have everything you could imagine on this retreat. We've got someone who's coming from Kenya this year to be in the retreat. And so the cultural mix that we get is amazing as well. So anyway, in our men's circle, each man just decided what they needed from the group in order to have a rite of passage. And mine was into eldership. Max's was into adulthood, and I think it was, the first year he was like so engaged and so loved it. Second year, becoming a teenager, he really didn't want to be there, right? He was doing it for his mom's sake, but he really got a lot out of that rite of passage. We don't have rites of passages like in tribal-based cultures. And so kids and people miss out on a lot of that. And so, and there are some, in Judaism you have the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah, but most people that go through that I talk to say, it wasn't very spiritual. It wasn't very meaningful. There's a lot of memorization, and I'm not slamming it. It certainly is better than nothing, right? But to have a rite of passage that's really conscious and designed for the individual, powerful, powerful thing. So I think that's all I have to say about this today. We love you guys. Thanks for tuning in, whether live or whether in retrospect afterwards. If you got something from this, give us a like, give us a share to anyone that you think could benefit. And my beloved will be back next week, and we'll see you then. So take care.